Breathe with me. Inhale it in. Exhale it out. Inhale it in. Exhale it out. Inhale it in. Exhale it out. Welcome back to Alchemist Soul. I am your host, Destiny. We talk a lot here about transformation, about taking the base materials of our lives, our society, our history, and subjecting them to the heat and pressure necessary to forge something new, something stronger, something with a clearer soul. But what happens when the base material itself is conflict? What if I told you that the United States of America doesn't just experience conflict? What if I told you it thrives on it, that discord, division, and even the specter of war are not bugs in the American system, but features? It sounds bleak, I know. It sounds cynical. Today, we're not going to shy away from that darkness. We're going to stare right into the crucible. We're going to ask the hard question: why is conflict so central to the American experience? And more importantly, for us as alchemists of the soul, why is this important to understand right now? Because once we see the pattern, once we understand the architecture of the conflict, we can stop being fuel for the fire and start becoming the fire tenders. We can learn to transmute the heat into light. This is our work today. Let's start with a fundamental truth. America was born from war, not just the Revolutionary War, but a near continuous state of conflict. As one analysis puts it, since its inception, there have been only about 16 to 18 years where the U.S. was not in some form of armed confrontation. Since World War II, the U.S. has been involved in over 80% of the world's armed conflicts. The historian Paul Atwood put it bluntly: war is the American way of life. Think about that for a second. Conflict isn't something that happens to America. It's something America does. It's in the DNA. Now, why? Why is a nation founded on Enlightenment ideals of liberty and justice so perpetual, geared for battle? Part of it is geography. The U.S. is insulated by two vast oceans. This has allowed it to project power outward while keeping the physical devastation of war largely off its own soil. War becomes an abstraction, a video game played on faraway screens. The domestic political cost stays low, while the machinery of war, the tanks, the bombs, the strategy, becomes a source of national identity and economic might. But this obsession isn't just about physical war anymore. It has metaphysized today. That same energy fuels our philosophical civil war. It's the way at home. We see it in the protests and counter-protests, the clashes over immigration, the burning cars in the streets, and the deployment of federal forces against state governors. One side sees the enforcement of law, the other sees authoritism. One side waves the American flag, another waves the flag of their ancestral homeland, signaling a loyalty that transcends national borders. We are a nation that perfected the art of controlled disorder overseas, destabilizing governments, funding insurgencies, sowing chaos in the name of stability, and now, as one commentator warned, a nation that sows chaos abroad eventually reap it at home. The habit of recklessness has turned inward. The tools of foreign policy have become the tools of domestic governance. We are now reaping what we have sown. So we have a nation built for external conflict, now turning that machinery on itself. But to truly understand this moment, we have to look at the deeper contradiction. Princeton sociologist Paul Starr argues that modern American politics is shaped by a fundamental gap, a society that has changed at warp speed, demographically, culturally, economically, governed by institutions designed centuries ago that have proven almost impossible to reform. Think about it. The civil rights movement, the women's rights movement, the LGBTQ plus movement, these were massive tectonic shifts in who we are as a people. They were conflicts, yes, but they were also moral advancements. They forced the country to live up to its ideals. They transformed the social landscape. But the political landscape, the electoral college, the structure of the Senate, the lifetime appointment of Supreme Court justices, the labyrinthine rules of Congress, these remain largely untouched. This creates what Starr calls a widening gap between a changing public and a system increasingly vulnerable to backlash and minority rule. This is the crucible. This gap is where the conflict festers. It's why we have the election of Barack Obama, a symbol of demographic and cultural change, followed directly by the backlash of the Tea Party, and the election of Donald Trump. The society moves forward, but the system creaks, groans, and often gets jammed in reverse. This institutional rigidly forces all conflict into the streets, into the courts, into the culture, and because the stakes feel existential, because the system doesn't provide a release valve, the conflict becomes total. It's no longer about policy. It's about identity. It's no longer about winning an argument. It's about annihilating the other side. One analysis described this new reality as an age of comprehensive conflict or total war, where there are no longer neat divisions between peace and war and combatants drawn on every resource, societal and economic, to prevail. It's a war without end because the fundamental contradiction hasn't been resolved. Okay, so we have a historical addiction to war and a structural inability to process change peacefully. This is bad, but it's not an accident. This is where the alchemist in us has to look past the politics and follow the money, because the third leg of this stool is the economic engine of conflict. It's easy to blame individual leaders. And yes, leadership matters, but the drive toward perpetual conflict is deeper than any other president or party. As one analysis puts it, critics often avoid analyzing the economic structure, chalking up war mongering to the foolishness of a few bad apples. But the reality is that the defense industry is not a small part of the American economy. It is a central pillar. Hundreds of billions of dollars are spent annually on the military. This spending supports corporate profits, funds technological advancement, and provides jobs in nearly every congressional district. For many regions, especially rural areas where manufacturing has disappeared, the military, police, and surveillance systems are among the only growing sectors of the economy. War and preparation for war have become a jobs program. And now this military-industrial complex has merged with the tech-industrial complex. Companies like Oracle, Planeter, Google, and Amazon grow fat like ticks, feeding on the military and intelligent budgets. They don't just build gadgets. They build the infrastructure of control, the algorithm of surveillance, the very architecture of the digital battlefield. Both overseas and at home, their profits depend on the perpetration of threat. They need a boogeyman. They need an endless conflict. This has created what you might call a military welfare state. It's a perverse system where the only form of guaranteed economic stimulus, the only thing both parties can agree to fund, is the machinery of death and control. Politicians can't oppose it because it's the only game in town that guarantees local jobs and corporate campaign donations. The system is designed to keep the fire burning because too many people have gotten rich off the heat. So here we are. A nation born of war, governed by antiquated institutions, with an economy addicted to conflict. The picture I painted is dark. It's tempting to despair, to unplug, to retreat into our own echo chambers, and wait for the inevitable crash. But that is not why we are here. We are Alchemist Soul. We believe in the power of transformation. And the first step in any alchemy is to correctly identify the base material. We have done that. The base material is a society marinated in conflict. But here's a crucial reframe. Conflict is not inherently bad. In fact, conflict is inevitable. As Jason Springs from the Kroc Institution for International Peace Studies points out, conflict is a natural byproduct of human relationship. The question is not how to eliminate it, but how to engage it constructively. How do we move from what he calls destructive conflict to a healthy conflict? Think about the movements I mentioned earlier. Civil rights, women's suffrage. They were deeply conflictual. They were divisive. People were beaten, jailed, and killed. But that conflict was in service of a moral imagination, a vision of a more just society. It was destructive to the old order, but constructive for the new. The problem in America today is that our conflict has become purely destructive. We have lost what Springs call the moral imagination, the ability to see the world from someone else's perspective, to recognize the deep history and legitimate grievance behind their position. We see the other side not as fellow citizens in a shared dilemma, but as enemies to be vanquished. We have to learn to fight better. We have to learn outrage, constructive conflict. This means acknowledging the architecture. Recognize that much of the conflict we consume is fuel for an economic and political machine that profits from our division. Turn off the 24-hour news cycle. Recognize the algorithm of outrage. Practice moral imagination. This is hard. It requires us to listen, truly listen to someone we disagree with, not to formulate a rebuttal, but to understand the story they are telling themselves about their life, their fears, and their hopes. Tracking structural violence. Healthy conflict requires us to relentlessly fight against the system that create inequality, injustice. We can't just imagine a better world. We have to build it. This means engaging in our local communities, in our institutions, in the slow, unglamorous work of making things work for everyone. America thrives on conflict. This is its inheritance and its addiction. But understanding why, the historical bloodlust, the institutional paralysis, the economic profit motive gives us power. It allows us to see the matrix. The fire is real. It is all around us. We can be consumed by it, adding our fear and anger to its fury. Or we can step into the role of the alchemist. We can use the heat of this moment to forge something new within ourselves. Empathy, resilience, and a commitment to a different kind of struggle. A struggle not for victory over the other, but for justice with the other. A struggle that seeks not to eliminate conflict, but to transform it into a generative force for a healthier, more inclusive democracy. The crucible is here. What will you forge in it? This is Alchemist Soul signing off. Stay curious, stay compassionate, and stay in the fire.